with you. I'm going to put that graph back on the screen so that it can seep in a little bit. Here's what it says, that in 1940, your odds were 90% when you were 30 years old of earning more than your parents had earned when they were 30. And if you bring it to modern time, it's at about 50%. What key, if any, do you think that holds to understanding the election?
Well, Michael, in my opinion, this is how you should. I mean, this is inequality. This is what is the #1 issue that undergirds everything that's been going on for us. You know, but this is. I always think of this in connection with the Bernie Sanders campaign. You know, the young people who are burdened down by the student loans, who are going out into to look for a job out of college and are running into the gig economy. You know, that sort of thing.
And in your book, J.D., here's the point I'm taking away. The folks you write about, who you were raised with in Appalachia, they didn't need the economists from Harvard and Stanford and University of California to tell them this. They've probably been hearing about the American dream, but not experiencing it themselves.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's surprising in some ways to me that this study came with such a wave of approval and excitement from the media, because it's really not that surprising. If you paid attention to the economic trends of America the past 30 years, you know that this has been a significant problem. And what's so striking about this is that, as you mentioned, folks who are born, more recently only have a 50% chance of making more than their parents, but that's really geographically concentrated in certain areas. So places like the industrial Midwest, where Donald Trump performs so well, this problem is especially acute. It's not so much of a problem, let's say, in California or in places like Kansas or Nebraska.
Well, to your point, and you remind me of Thomas's other book, or one of his many books, which was What's the Matter with Kansas? Let me put a map of the country up on the screen and show you where your prospects are worse of outperforming your parents. Look at the South. I mean, look at those southern states. And gentlemen, if it's reminiscent of anything, let me now put on the screen the electoral map of 2016. I mean, there's a lot of correspondence, Thomas Frank, between where Trump won and where the American dream is not being utilized. You have argued previously that those folks were nevertheless voting against their own economic interest.
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, that's a different story, but we'll get to that in a second. But there's a lot of maps like that you could use, Michael. I mean, the map of shorter life expectancy for people, the places where people are using methamphetamine, all of these things. Wherever you find the sort of economic despair and destruction, you'll find, I'm sorry to say, a lot of Trump voters. And back to about people and their economic interests. Well, the idea that Trump is going to fix this? Oh, come on now! Look who he just appointed to be a labor secretary.
J.D., respond to that. I mean, Thomas makes the point that the labor secretary nominee is not someone supportive of, for example, a minimum wage. Will those folks who are in that very dark and shaded part of the country get the relief they're looking for?
Well, I think a lot of folks in that part of the country, when they think of the labor secretary, they're probably more upset about his views on immigration than the minimum wage, and we can sort of figure out which is more important from the perspective of a low-wage worker. But I really think that ultimately these voters are going to judge Donald Trump not on who he puts in some of these positions, but on whether their lives actually get better over the long term. These folks give politicians a fairly long leash. They voted for Bush in 2000. A lot of them voted for Barack Obama in 2008 and have just now swung to Donald Trump in the past few months. So I really think that whether those things that Thomas talks about, the meth addictions, the opiate addictions, the wage stagnation, if those things start to move in the right direction, a lot of people are going to care who the labor secretary or who the commerce secretary is.
And Thomas, is part of this aspirational, that maybe they're not caught up so much, these voters that you've both written so effectively about, they're not caught up so much on trade policy as they are being aspirational. They look at Donald Trump, he's a huge success financially speaking, and they say, I want to be like him. I'm going to cast my lot with Donald Trump, whether he's a Republican or a Democrat.
Of course, that's exactly right. But like J.D. just said, I mean, how things change in their actual lives is what really makes a difference. And here you have to go back to to the lost promise of Barack Obama. I mean, he was elected in 2008 for a lot of the very same reasons, you know. The economy was in free fall. You remember what this was like. And we elected him with all of that hope. And this sort of grand picture inequality, the deterioration of the American dream, did not reverse itself. And you think of all the things he could have done to change the direction of the country on this, getting tough with Wall Street, making it easier to form a labor union, starting to enforce antitrust laws, for Pete's sake. Any of these things would have made a dent in those numbers, you know, in this big picture sort of disaster that we're talking about that has befallen Middle America. He didn't do those things, and now we have gone, you know, now our hope has sort of curdled into despair.
But you know, J.D., final thought from you. What I think of when I look at that initial graph is that there wasn't so much zigging and zagging. Do you mind indulging me? Put it on the screen one more time. But there was a pretty steady decline from 1940 until the present day, which tells me, there it is, I mean, which tells me that, frankly, this hasn't been because of any particular administration. It makes me wonder, J.D., have things been so good for so long in this country? Do so many have flat screens? And do so many have a home that it couldn't always continue the way in which it had been? You get the final word.
Well, I think it's important to recognize that these trends are absolutely bigger than one politician or one single party. This is a long-term problem in our economy, and it's not just about the decline of unions. It's also about the fact that our technology has made it so that we prioritize and value skills in our economy more than we ever have. It's harder to get a good job if you're graduating from high school without good trade schools or good access to a college education. The simple fact is that this is a long-term and complicated problem, and I think the failure of Barack Obama, and frankly the failure of the politicians that came before him on both parties, is the failure to recognize that this is a long-term problem that requires extraordinarily dedicated and complex policy work, and frankly neither party has really been up to it for the past, obviously, 30 or 40 years.
That was my point. Thank you, gentlemen. Plenty of blame to go around. J.D. Vance and Thomas Frank, nobody knows those issues better than those two gentlemen. What are your thoughts? Tweet me at Smerconish. I'll continue to read the best during the course of the program. What do we got, Catherine? You liberal Democrats just don't stop. Your jealous opposition to Trump is what's hurting this country. Hey, Jack Brad, is that your name? No, I'm an American first. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not an independent first. I'm an American first. And I'm frustrated by the idea that people are so caught up in their partisanship as to whether they like the outcome of the election that it then dictates whether they care about a Russian hack of what Phil Mudd said is one of the most sacred aspects of being an American. And that is our right to a free and open democracy. I mean, come on, man. Still to come. That new CIA intel revealing Russia was involved in the 2016 election trying to help Trump. Intel that Trump's team attacks is partisan and not credible. I'm so thrilled that Sean Spicer will be here to hash that out with me.
Choose to go. To indulge your curiosity. Explore a new road to see where it takes you. Meet the leaders who change the game. No matter where you are, no matter what the currency, when you run the numbers, they may surprise you. But stay your course. You're on the path to success. CNN Money.